They live past 100, and they're quietly skipping the foods your doctor told you to eat every day. Here's what nobody in Western health culture wants to talk about. The longest lived population on the planet has spent their entire lives avoiding 3 foods that we've been told are non-negotiable for health for over a century. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which 3 foods Japanese elders quietly skip, why the science actually backs them up on every single one, and most importantly, what you can swap in today without turning your entire diet upside down. No extreme overhaul, no expensive supplements, just a fundamental shift in how you think about what healthy eating actually means. And stay with me through food number 3. That one is going to challenge something you probably believe right now, today, about protein. Before we get into the 3 foods, you need to understand where this comes from, because this isn't a wellness trend. It's not influencer advice, and it didn't come from a lab. It came from a small island called Okinawa, Japan. Okinawa is one of the most studied regions on Earth when it comes to human longevity. It's part of what researchers call the blue zone specific geographic areas, where people consistently live longer, healthier lives than almost anywhere else on the planet. Okinawa has one of the highest concentrations of centenarians, people over 100 inches the world. And they're not just alive. They're active, cognitively sharp, and largely free from the chronic diseases that dominate Western aging. Here's a critical detail. The Okinawan diet wasn't designed by nutritionists. Nobody engineered it. It emerged from poverty and necessity. The island's traditional population ate what was cheap and available: sweet potatoes, soybeans, fermented vegetables, seaweed, and small amounts of fish. Meat was rare. Dairy was essentially non-existent. Breakfast looked nothing like a bowl of cereal. Simplicity, not sophistication, drove their longevity. Longevity researchers have spent decades documenting how this dietary pattern lowers cardiovascular disease risk, reduces chronic inflammation, and supports long-term cognitive health well into old age. That's the foundation. Now let's talk about what they actually skipped and why it matters for you. This one surprises people every single time. If you grew up in a Western household, dairy is practically sacred. Milk builds strong bones. Calcium requires dairy. Greek yogurt is the ideal high-protein snack. Cottage cheese is a fitness staple. This messaging is so deeply embedded that questioning it feels almost radical. But here's the reality. Traditional Okinawan elders consumed virtually 0 dairy across their entire lives. Not reduced dairy, not organic dairy, 0. And yet they have some of the lowest rates of osteoporosis-related complications of any studied population. The "you need dairy for strong bones" narrative simply doesn't survive contact with this data. So where did they get their calcium? The same place plants always provided dark leafy greens, tofu, edamame, and seaweed varieties like kombu and wakame. These foods are calcium-dense, widely available, and come without the saturated fat load that heavy dairy consumption introduces over time. Because that's the other side of this equation. Regularly consuming high-fat dairy products, heavy cream, aged cheeses, full-fat milk introduces a meaningful amount of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol that research consistently associates with increased cardiovascular stress over decades. Not immediately, over decades. And when you live to 100, decades matter. The takeaway here isn't throw out the cheese. It's a more important question. How much of your calcium and nutrition is already sitting in plant-based sources you're underusing? Tofu with breakfast, a handful of edamame as a snack, seaweed in a soup. These aren't exotic choices, they're ancient ones. And the data on the people who built their lives around them is hard to argue with. This one is going to feel personal. Because breakfast cereal and granola have been sold to us aggressively for decades as the smart, healthy choice. The box says whole grain. It says heart healthy. It says high fiber. Granola specifically has developed an almost premium wellness reputation, clean eating, sophisticated nutrition, and almost all of it is quietly loaded with sugar. Not candy bar levels of sugar, subtle sugar, just enough to make it taste good without triggering obvious alarm. But that sugar hits your bloodstream fast, spikes your blood glucose, and then drops it, and that crashes inflammation. Do that every morning for 40 years and you have a very different metabolic picture than someone who started every morning with something warm, savory, and fermented, which is exactly what Japanese elders did. A traditional Okinawan breakfast might include a simple miso soup with tofu and seaweed, a portion of fermented vegetables like pickled daikon, and a small amount of rice. That's it. Warm, low glycemic, gut supporting. No spike, no crash, just steady, sustained energy through the morning. The research on this is increasingly compelling. High glycemic breakfasts are associated with elevated risk of type 2 diabetes, chronic fatigue, and systemic inflammation. Meanwhile, fermented foods, miso, pickled vegetables, kimchi-adjacent preparations actively support the gut microbiome, and the gut longevity connection is one of the most exciting areas in modern health research. Japanese elders were living this principle long before scientists had the language to describe why it worked. Here's your actionable takeaway, and it's simpler than you think. You don't need to learn to make miso soup tomorrow. You just need to stop starting your day with a blood sugar spike. Replace the cereal or granola with warm oatmeal, no added sugar or eggs, or even a savory soup if you're feeling adventurous. The goal isn't culinary perfection. The goal is to give your metabolism a calmer morning than it's been getting. One swap, 1 week, see how you feel. This is the one that challenges fitness culture most directly. So I want you to stay open for the next 2 minutes because the research here is genuinely striking. We are living in the era of protein. High protein diets dominate mainstream nutrition advice. Chicken breast, egg whites, turkey, protein shakes, these are the cultural currency of health-conscious eating. Hit your protein macros has become as common a directive as drink more water. Now, consider this. Meat and seafood combined made up roughly 1 to 2% of total daily caloric intake in the traditional Okinawan diet. 1 to 2%. That is not a rounding error. That is a fundamentally different relationship with animal protein than what most Western diets recommend. So what did they eat? Primarily sweet potatoes, specifically a purple variety called Beni Imo, which provided complex carbohydrates, fiber, powerful antioxidants, and steady energy without the digestive load of heavy protein. Soybeans, tofu, and legumes filled the protein gap. When meat appeared, it was in small amounts, often as a flavoring rather than a centerpiece. The argument against large animal protein portions isn't that protein is bad. It's that when meat dominates the plate, it consistently crowds out the fiber-rich, plant-based foods that support gut diversity, reduce inflammation, and protect against the cellular aging processes that accumulate over decades. A plant-forward plate doesn't just feed you, it feeds the trillions of microorganisms in your gut that regulate everything from immune function to mood to metabolic health. This is not a call to go vegan. That's not the point, and it's not what the data suggests either. The point is proportional. Most Western diets have the protein to plant ratio almost completely inverted compared to what the world's longest lived populations actually eat. Shifting that ratio even slightly, making plants the center of the plate and meat a supporting player can produce meaningful health outcomes over time without asking you to give up anything you love. Now here's what separates the Okinawan approach from every diet trend you've ever tried and abandoned. The food choices aren't isolated. They're part of a broader philosophy of living that makes these habits sustainable for a lifetime, not just a few weeks. The first principle is hara hachi bu. Eating until you are 80% full, then stopping. Not stuffed, not satisfied. 80%. This functions as a natural calorie reduction strategy without counting, tracking, or obsessing. It's a mindful pause before reaching for more. Over a lifetime, it significantly reduces the cumulative metabolic load on the body. The second principle is Kaizen, continuous incremental improvement. Not dramatic transformation, not a total diet overhaul on January 1st that collapses by February. 1% improvements, stacked over time. Replace one food this week. Add a 5-minute walk after dinner next week. Eat slightly slower at the meal after that. These micro changes don't require willpower because they don't feel like sacrifice, which means they actually last. The third principle is ikigai, a daily sense of purpose, not a grand life ambition. Something simpler, A reason to get up in the morning that feels meaningful. A garden to tend. A family to cook for. A craft to practice. Longevity research consistently identifies social connection and sense of purpose as among the strongest predictors of long life in many studies, stronger than specific dietary choices. The food matters, but who you eat with and why you get up in the morning might matter more. Let's bring this together, simply. 3 foods, 3 swaps, 1 week. Swap a dairy-heavy snack for edamame or a handful of leafy greens. Replace your morning cereal or granola with warm oatmeal, eggs, or if you're curious, a simple miso soup. And once this week, build a dinner where plants are the main event and meat is the garnish rather than the centerpiece. None of these changes ask you to be perfect. None of them require a specialty health food store. The traditional Okinawan diet was built on the cheapest, most accessible foods available. Sweet potatoes, tofu, miso, leafy greens. These are not luxury items. They are ancient staples that powered one of the longest-lived populations in documented history. Longevity isn't built in a single meal. It's built in the accumulated weight of thousands of small, consistent decisions made with care over a lifetime. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. So here's where we land. The 3 foods Japanese elders quietly avoid: dairy, breakfast cereals, and large portions of lean animal protein, aren't villains. They're simply products of a different food culture, one that doesn't reflect what the world's longest-lived people actually built their lives around. The real question isn't whether these foods are technically edible. The real question is, what would change for you if you replaced even one of them with something closer to what Okinawan elders have eaten for generations? Pick one. Just one. Commit to reducing it for 7 days. Let curiosity drive the experiment, not discipline, not guilt, not fear. That's the Japanese approach. Persistent, gentle attention to how you live each day. If this shifted how you think about your daily meals, drop a comment below. I want to know which of the 3 surprised you most.